ensure that over time this is a strong and resilient country. The second element I brought to the table is that we urgently have to rearm Europe. And for that I will present a comprehensive plan how to rearm Europe on the 6th of March when we have our European Council to the leaders.
And like she said, that there is the need for them to be able to rearm Europe. But then we ask ourselves the question, rearming Europe, could that not spark some sort of tensions between, you know, the European body as well as other global powers within the region, given that there has been the strained tensions with Russia for a while, since 2022. And of course, remember when the US president, before he came to power, he had stated that he was going to do everything within his power to be able to, you know, curb the ongoing tensions between Russia and Ukraine. Up to date, there have been meetings, like we saw the restoration of relations between the two parties when they had their first meeting since 2022 in Saudi Arabia recently, and they spoke about how they could normalize their relations. So away from that, we just got indications that Dr. FONGOD is back with us. Dr. FONGOD, you're welcome back, and having watched the videos without wasting too much of your time, Trump's statements, though we could affirm it's bold and to some extent might be exaggerated, but is there a concern that the war in Ukraine could escalate into a global conflict?
Absolutely. I think that what we need to understand fully is that long when this war started, we were basically at the precipice of having a third world war. And the reason for that was because of all the parties that were involved. Remember, all of Europe is absolutely behind Ukraine, and they were with this agenda of pushing, you know, the NATO front into territories that, you know, all conventions prior to 2020, you know, had really not been respected by the gains NATO was supposed to meet, you know, going east. So Russia had every single right to be able to get, you know, I mean, they were angry enough because they were trying as much as they could to be able to bring Ukraine into NATO. And so that was the reason why, you know, Putin decided to make the gains he made entering into Ukraine. And I think that it is to the best interest of the world that there is peace in Ukraine, and this posturing that is coming from the liberal left-wing ideology and media around the world, basically blaming Donald Trump or trying to be able to incite this violence, you know, that is gripping the world, that is not just selfish, it's irresponsible. And we have to be able to have a world that understands that when you have two nuclear power that fight, it is at no one's advantage because nobody wins. As a matter of fact, if the US or Russia was going to fight, and if nuclear weapon was going to be involved, then we can as well kiss this world goodbye.
Yeah, listening to you, Dr. FONGOD, well, when you got the excerpt of the EU president, the president of the EU Commission, von der Leyen, she stated in one of her last words, which I just listened quite a way, she said, there is a need for them to rearm Europe, or rearm Europe as a body or as a bloc. Now, looking at the statement, how do you assess the impact of the European financial support in light of Zelensky's failed meetings with Trump and the growing tensions between, you know, Washington and Europe over the Ukraine issue?
Well, the reality is that Europe needs to be able to pay their fair share so far as securing Europe is concerned. And I think that if you look at the biggest sponsor of NATO, the biggest sponsor of NATO has not been any European nation, it has been America. And yet America is geographically, you know, far off from any incursion that might be coming from that side towards Russia, even though technically it's just Russia and US is separated or close to about, you know, 30 miles. That's quite scary if you can think about it, especially you know, through Alaska. And so we have to be able to make sure, no matter what happens, that there is somewhat peace, which basically means if Europe is trying to put the foot off the bill for their own security, then let them go ahead and do it. But I don't understand exactly what the US got to do with anything, for that matter, or Donald Trump. For once, I think that I have to stomp for Donald Trump. I have to stomp for US diplomacy, this version of US diplomacy.
looking at the future, like you mentioned, the U.S. is taking different turns as opposed to what was done during the previous administration under Joe Biden. Now, looking at present-day relations between U.S. and Ukraine, has the failure of the discussions between Trump and Zelensky widened the gap between the United States and Europe, from your perspective?
Look, here's the thing. If you try, what you need to first of all understand is what is the posture that the world is taking. There is this idea in the world of having some kind of a global world.
True.
And that global world is being created. It's being created, formulated by the world elites. And the idea is, they look at the world as a frontier. They look at the world, as this one global village where they basically rule and become the master of everyone. You're looking at the World Economic Forum, for example. You're looking at the World Bank. These are the organizations and the group that thinks that they really should be able to run the world. I don't buy into that ideology. I think that we need to be able to protect our individual sovereignty and then be able to create a world that is as multinational, multicultural, multi-ethnic as the world is right now. It is to the advantage of us all to have a world like that. I don't want to live in a world, where it's where somebody who is unelected by anyone basically decides what has to happen with my body or what has to happen, with my person. I think that time has come for the world to fully understand what is going on. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is basically a nationalist, and it is not a bad word. It is just means someone who basically believes in the sovereign integrity of their own nation. And so if you're going to look at it from that perspective, he is what he is, and he has pushed this agenda, and that is the agenda that brought him to the White House, which basically states that I am going to defend the integrity of the United States of America, this culture, and push prosperity at home and allow the citizens of the United States to be able to flourish. I think I have said this time and time again, one of the best speeches ever given by Donald Trump was at the United Nations. He made 4 statements and the whole world was laughing before the 5th statement came. The first was this, that America was great. America has the best military. America was prosperous. America has built so much, weapons, and they were ready for whatever will come. America was just that great. And the whole world kept laughing. I mean, everyone at the United Nations, was just in awe as to, this buffoon they thought. And then he said, go and make your countries great. And then no one was laughing after that, because there's nothing else to be said when someone basically gives you an open challenge, especially when you come from a country that has been known, for corruption, when you come from a country that has been known for no fair elections, when you come from a country where the rule of law and democracy basically do not exist. Once you hear a statement like that, you have nothing else to do but to be able to look into the mirror and have some kind of a self-retrospection where you basically tell yourself, you know what, I've been screwed in many ways, and frankly speaking, this man speaks to my heart. So what I'm trying to say to you is this, and to those who are listening, is we have to be able to understand that when it comes to somebody building and making sure that their country basically stands out and that country succeeds and that country basically holds its own sovereignty, it is something to be admired. And what that means is to the rest of the world, especially to those of us on the African continent, we need to build home. We need to be able to make sure that home is home, and make sure that by the time you look at Africa, look at the continent as a whole, it is a place to admire. It's a place where everyone wants to come. It becomes a tourist attraction around the world. That's what we need to do. And I think that from that front, Donald Trump is doing what Donald Trump says he was going to do, and it's something remarkable.
Well, picking up from where you stopped, it's no secret that Russia has always opposed Ukraine's integration into NATO. But how have Ukraine's requests for military aid from, be it from the United States, from the European Union, and the support from NATO contributed to this tension, the simmering tensions that have been existing with Russia?
I think it's a fraud, to say the least. It's a fraud. And this has nothing to do with the men who has been fighting on the battlefields, losing their lives. War is bad business, especially when it comes to civilians, especially when it comes to soldiers. It's bad business. I don't think that there's anybody who is sitting here, I'm not sitting here and basically throwing shade, at Ukrainian soldiers. Neither am I throwing shade at Russian soldiers or anyone in between who has been involved in this war, who have lost their life needlessly. And so the reality is that this is bad business. But there's something we need to understand, which is called the military-industrial complex. What the military-industrial complex is this whole entire enterprise that is built, controlled, funded by war, which means that if there is no war, then, you know, they don't make money. They only make money when there are instabilities. They only make money when people do fight. A peaceful world means that, you know, the military-industrial complex will be losing to the tons of millions of US dollars on a daily basis. If you have to think about how much money a missile cost, if you have to think about how much money an RPG cost, then you will know that these men will do whatever it takes to be able to destabilize the world and destabilize different regions of the world, just so that they can keep funding and they can keep, you know, selling their weapons of war into these areas. I don't think that what is happening or what has happened, all the money that has gotten into Ukraine has been of any good to anyone. By the way, 175 billion US dollars, tax dollars, part of which I pay taxes in the US, you know, has gone into supporting, you know, Ukraine. But most of the weapons of war that was being sent out into Ukraine was sold in the black market for pennies on the dollars. And that's how we got, you know, weapons of war meant for Ukraine ending up on African soil in places like the Sahel. Right? In recent times, I think last month, we're looking at a part of April, I think it was April 20-something, where a US congressman, Scott, basically came out on the US floor and reported about the fact that not only that US funding, okay, clearly underneath the Liberal Democratic Party was heading, okay, to ISIS, heading to Boko Haram in Nigeria. And it makes sense, because if you think about it, there were reports back when we had the Truth Commission on the Boko Haram situation in Nigeria, where villagers were reporting seeing helicopters landing with white men on board, offloading weapons of war and money. And so and there was times also where questions were being asked. How can it be? And this is when one of the helicopters actually crashed. How can it be? And this was the question that was being asked. How can it be that Boko Haram is having fresh US dollar notes? I mean, clean crisps. Where was this money coming from? So the question here is that we need to be able to fully understand, especially when we look at the diplomacy and the Western world, that what is white sometimes tends to be blue, and what is blue most often at times is yellow. Truth is not something else that seems to be coming out of Washington these days, and we need to be a little bit quite careful when it comes to us aligning with people. And I think, in my opinion, that the reason why this actually happened within the Boko Haram situation was because Barack Hussein Obama was very interested in setting up a military base in Nigeria, of which they basically rejected that outright. And so I'm sure in trying to be able to create a situation where the U.S. military base will, or where the U.S. government will be called upon to do something in Nigeria, and one of the concessions will be to set up a base, they funded Boko Haram. Let's not forget that hundreds of people died, probably thousands of people died as a result of that atrocity. And that is what is going on, and I think that time has come for Africa and Africans to be able to basically look somewhere else, you know, apart from always looking to Washington, D.C. or Paris.
Exactly, and of course we were coming back to that point, because it's imperative for Africans to know that they are the ones that hold their own destiny. They are the ones to take their destiny into their hands, you know, take decisive action for their own future. But before we get back to the African stance as far as, you know, this geopolitical shift is concerned, we are seeing that the United States is redefining its relationship with Ukraine with the recent tensions we have seen between both parties in recent times. But from your own perspective, why is Europe bent on supporting Ukraine in spite of the ongoing tensions, you know, coming all the way from the United States, maybe the repulsion from the US and other parties? Well,
you know, there's this ideology in Europe that Ukraine is just the first step of Putin's ambitions into Europe.
Exactly.
But so far as I'm concerned, that is absolutely not true. That's useless talk. The reason is this: we need to ask ourselves the questions. Why did Putin invade Ukraine? Putin invaded Ukraine because all the conventions that were signed by Europe, especially with NATO, none of those conventions was respected. And it all had to do with the fact that Ukraine was never going to be part of NATO. And the reason for that is because if Ukraine became part of NATO, then that means missiles will have to be placed inside of Ukraine pointing towards Russia or Moscow. And there was no way Russia was going to take that. And unfortunately, because those conventions was not respected, that is exactly what happened. I don't seem to understand why Europe keeps pushing. And if not for the fact that these are men who basically, are on the throes of their lives, I think that maybe, I don't know exactly what their motivations are, but they increasingly seems to have this appetite to push the whole entire globe, into a world war, but into a world war with who? Because that will not be a world war. That will be 1, 2, 3, finish. Everybody else. Look, it takes 2 or 3 nuclear it takes 2 or 3 nuclear bombs. By the time we begin to figure out what is going on, maybe about 6 would have gone off, and then we can as well just kiss this whole entire beautiful planet, goodbye. Why? So we have to be able to fully understand what is going on so far as Europe is concerned. I have no idea, why they're pushing for this level of madness, but the reality is this: if they had maintained the conventions they signed in the first place, Russia will not be inside of Ukraine. There will be no fighting. There will absolutely be no fighting. So Russia is fighting to maintain its sovereign integrity in relationship to making sure that, its borders are safe. And we are dealing with a superpower with more nuclear weapons than any other country on planet Earth, which is Russia. Okay, we are also dealing with a man who is known officially as a madman, in the name of Putin, who basically can do anything if he's been pushed into the wall. I don't know exactly what the reasons are that Europe is pushing. The last days of the Biden administration, they did the same blunder by authorizing the use of U.S. missiles that was never authorized, or U.S. weapons that were not authorized before during the entire war. But why Biden was leaving the White House, his cronies, I don't know exactly who was making those decisions, decided that they were going to authorize Ukraine to use those wars because they were trying to push Russia to do something that's stupid so that they can retaliate in the way they wanted to. The real thing, I think that we have to come into a place where we understand that Europe is really not speaking for the rest of the world. And time has to come when the rest of the world needs to be able to look at Europe and basically tell Europe, you know what, this thing you're doing is basically against all rule of law, and it's literally going to put the rest of the world, in harm's way, and we have to be able to basically take this stuff to the court. I think that the best course of action will be to take it up to the court, which is actually in Europe, and basically maybe just make a good PR campaign for it, because there's really nothing else that would happen anyway. But with that, which our best hope is the United States of America, the best hope for peace in the world is Donald Trump.
We shall be coming back to that recent statement, like von der Leyen said, about is just investing in energy and making Ukraine have a strong and resilient economy. In her words, you said Donald Trump is the future of peace in the United States. Now, looking at his administration that started this 2025, do you believe that it's possible that there will be this change, in the trajectory of war or in terms of global security?
Look at Trump's first term. Trump's first term was that was the most peaceful time on planet Earth. Trump's first administration term in office, we had absolutely no wars. There were no new wars created underneath Trump. None. period. There was no issues in the Middle East. As a matter of fact, there was something called the Abraham Accord, which was well celebrated. I mean, that was like the Nobel Peace Prize winning accord. Unfortunately, he's Donald Trump, and nobody's going to give that to him. But the reality is we never saw that. All right, there was nothing in the Middle East. There was nothing in Europe. The world was relatively peaceful, apart from those of us on the African continent whom, nobody cares anyway. All right, we'll kill ourselves, morning, afternoon, evening, and the world will not report about it. And I don't blame the world for not reporting about it. I blame Africans for not reporting about it, and I blame Africans for killing Africans. It's not the world's responsibility what we do on the continent of Africa. Likewise, I cannot be stopping the world from coming to invade the continent of Africa, and also asking the world to mediate on the issues that pertain the continent. I think that we Africans basically need to have some real level of conscience to be able to treat one another, namely that no one else is coming but us. The African is the one you have been waiting for. It is not a Caucasian, it's another African, and that African is you. That being said, I think that what Donald Trump has done and what he did in his first term was remarkable, and it is the continuation of that. The idea is this: why would the US be involved in endless wars like what was taking place in Afghanistan? Why would the US be involved in all these wars around the world? But there is a group in the United States, which is basically the industrial military complex, that wants wars to continue because that's how they make money. But the reality is this, that we have to change our business model and then try to push the business model for peace. And the business model for peace basically means you have a strong military, you stand strong, okay, you have all the weapons of war just in case, but yet push for peace. You need to push for peace. All right, the best way to stay alive is not to fight, is to push for peace. The best strategy, okay, for peace is not to fight and suppress anyone, is to be able to build up a robust military and maintain certain level of maintain certain standards around the world, also making sure that not everybody else has nuclear weapons, because then you basically just make the whole entire world a little bit more dangerous. So I think that what Donald Trump is doing in the United States is remarkable. Just like I said, the hope for peace around the world is Donald Trump.
Exactly. Now, looking at the African stance, we've discussed what's happening as far as the global world is concerned. But then I remember in our previous edition, we're discussing the shift in global alliances, and this happens to fall into that context. Now, looking at the African continent, many times Africa has been caught in between the web of what's happening away from Africa. So how can Africa shield itself from these similar intentions that are growing out of the African continent?
Africa fully needs to understand what has been going on in the first place. We just talked about the issue of Boko Haram.
True.
We've now talked about the issues of ISIS. We have talked about Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb. There's this Rumi in the Sahara, in the Sahel. We have talked about the issues which existed just not long ago, about a couple of months ago, before Trump took office, where weapons of war headed to Ukraine ended up on African soil, and there were basically logistic support from Ukraine to fight Russian mercenaries that were in the Sahel, and a lot of them got killed, and this will be the Wagner Group soldiers. A lot of them missionaries, a lot of them got killed on African soil. And so the reality is this, that the continent of Africa will, if we are not careful, become a proxy, okay, for superpowers to be able to carry out their wars on. We have to be able to find ways in which we shield the continent, and the first thing to do is to be able to disassociate ourselves from any superpower and basically build up a robust intelligence structure in terms of military on the continent of Africa that would tell us who is coming, where they're coming from, and where they're going. Unfortunately, we do not have that. The continent as a whole, so far as security is concerned, is more like a banana republic. We don't know what's happening, we don't know who's in charge, we don't know who should be in charge, and that in itself is a little bit troubling. There have been a lot of stuff taking place on the African continent that is truly sad, especially when it comes to our own sovereignty and security. I think that we need to build something up, and that is why I say we need maybe a year or two to revamp, restructure this, just basically break down, scatter the whole entire AU structure, go back into the sub-regions, allow ECOWAS, allow SADC, allow the East African community to be able to take care of the issues of Africa for a year and a half, while we build something that is truly strong. We build something else in the place of AU, not just about changing the name, but changing the structure. The old OAU was changed to AU, but the fundamentals, the structure of the OAU was never changed. And what we thought that maybe if we just put up a different name, somehow, you know, the mode of operation will kind of improve. That did not work. We need something absolutely different. We need to restructure. We need to change. We need to bring something else, new ideas. We need to build something in the place of the EU. With that, which the issues of security, the issues of us understanding what we need to do, and basically helping the continent grow on economic front, you know, on technological fronts, and basically making sure that we know who is coming into the continent and who is not coming to the continent, and that comes as a result of us sharing information from one government to another, because we probably might have a superstructure on the continent in terms of internet, in terms of technology, that will be able to allow for intelligence gathering and intelligence sharing among nations or member states. That is something else that we need on the continent of Africa, and I think that that is part of the ways in which we can be able to shield ourselves from whatever is happening outside of the continent of Africa. And lastly, we neither look to the west, neither shall we look to the east. We look within. It's not Russia, it's not China, it's not India, it's not Japan. It's not America, it's not France, it is not Europe as a bloc, it's Africa. Once we focus on the continent of Africa, that will shield us from whatever madness is happening outside of the continent.
Exactly, it's all about looking inward, and of course we mentioned that the ball is in the court of the African continent. Africans alone can make the continent great, and of course, like we always say, Africa first. Always look within Africa and not outside, rather than depending on external parties to come and resolve what's happening. Look for solutions, African solutions to African problems. We just got indications that Chief MUSI, who has joined us this afternoon and caused a conversation. You're welcome, Your Majesty, and just to pick up from where your co-panelists stopped, since we're discussing these tensions at the global level, in your perspective, do you think that the international community should really be worried?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sharon, and I want to greet the last speaker, Dr. FONGOD, for the wonderful contribution he's made. One thing is very clear, which I want to emphasize about the topic of our conversation today. I think the West are instigating whatever they're instigating. If there is supposed to be a third world war, it's definitely going to affect Africa. And what I know from history is that those wars, even as we are propagating, were fought by Africans. We fought the wars. We gave victory to the Western world. And if today they're propagating of a third world war, they are plunging Africa into problems, because at the end of the day, the wealth that has been built by the West has been wealth from Africa. And because it's wealth from Africa, it gives no reason for the West to think that if there is a third world war, whoever is a super world power is definitely going to defeat. Mm-hmm. I have a feeling that what Donald Trump did in the Oval Office the other day with Zelensky was not called for. Why would you use the media to intimidate the world? Why will you use the media to transmit such a sensitive meeting, which you are trying to advise. You're trying to advise a country to sign a peace deal. You cannot use the media because there are certain sensitive issues that these people will be discussing in the course of such a meeting that the media should not be aware of. So I got a little bit worried when I realized that Zelensky was put in front of the American presidency, the American leadership, to be discussing issues concerning a peace treaty or a peace deal. And I think that all what is going on so far in America and the West, they are relying on Africa. They are relying on Africa. And I must say that my contribution on this show would be that African leaders should not take the West serious on this conversation that is ongoing. Because if they do, they should be ready to pay the price for whatever will come out of this. And I'm sorry to say, I appreciate Zelensky's standpoint. I appreciate his standpoint because he didn't handle that conversation as a conversation that was on the screens. He didn't handle it that way. He actually handled that conversation as a one-on-one conversation, which was the normal way this conversation was supposed to take place. So my follow-up, I don't know what the other panelists said before I came in, but I want to be very sincere here that if we Africans must learn a lesson, let's not take what is going on in the West as something that we can rely upon. Let's rather think that it is the right time for us as Africans to rely on the truth, to believe on our continent, and to make use of the resources that we have in our continent. Because it's only in these resources that we have in our continent that we are going to make this continent better. And to have been at a position where the American government was pushing Zelensky and telling him that he doesn't have the cards, it's an indirect way of telling Zelensky that he's losing the war. But woe betide, we shouldn't relent our efforts to think that Zelensky doesn't have the cards. He is a president, he has his own backing, and you cannot tell another president that he doesn't have the cards. You must be able to listen to him. You must be able to give him every dialogue. What is America showing? For every honest and sincere dialogue that must take place, everyone must come to the table with equal powers. So I don't see any reason why the West had to pull Zelensky to a position where he felt like he was defeated. So my input here is to say that whatever conversation is going on, there is nothing that is happening like a third world war. And if the third world war has to happen, the West and America must be ready to stand the challenges that will come, or to stand the effects that will come with the third world war they are talking about. And African leaders must, at this moment in time, reason a little bit out of the box to understand that the West are actually plunging us Africans into something wonderful, which is going to affect Africa, and bloodshed is going to start in Africa. So my call as a Pan-Africanist is for African leaders to sit down, reinforce, I don't know if we are calling it the African Union, whatever thing is happening, they should build regional blocks in Africa, which kind of propagate the idea of Africa being a one and united continent. I am comfortable with what is going on around the Sahel region, and I think that all other African countries should come on the table and start thinking of free trade, free movement, free trade, and a liberal economy for Africa. I think that's what I just wanted to chip in before as I joined the show, and to say that let us as Pan-Africanists continue to propagate what is Africa and remain strong with our beliefs in Africa, and put a strong bond in Africa that no one can break. And I keep thanking the Sahel countries for such a wonderful initiative that's going on. And I think, if I'm not getting it wrong, that if the new African currency comes and gets into operation, the West are going to refocus and rethink about what actually they want to do, especially when it comes to this conversation between Russia, Ukraine, and an American intervention, and the EU. Thank you.
Thank you to Chief MUSI, but I'll be staying with you, given you mentioned a lot of pertinent points. Before you got with us, we had your co-panelist, Dr. FONGOD, that was stating that Africa at this point in time, especially with the tensions ongoing at the global level or out of the African continent, we need to look inward. And you reiterated in the course of your response that it's imperative for, Africa to strengthen some of its institutions within the African continent so it can be able to brace itself ahead of what's coming. Now, do you share the same opinion as your co-panelists that Africa needs definitely to, to reshape its own opinion as far as the global stage is concerned, look for its own solutions within Africa, build bodies that will defend the continent first before it looks at thinking of the implications that will come with the tensions ongoing between the United States and Ukraine or otherwise?
Well, I think it's important to highlight that Africa needs to build stronger institutions. We need to build stronger institutions because we are at the verge of building Africa. And let's not forget that whatever conversation is going on in the West, it's a conversation that is trying to change the game. And they have seen what is going on in Africa. They have seen the bloc that we are building in Africa. They have seen the way African leaders are going out of colonization, decolonization, and decolonizing themselves. And I think the West, they are at a point where they actually want to create pressure at the level of the West, and at the end of the day, bring that pressure to Africa and destabilize Africa. That's why you see most of the European countries, in as much as they are concentrating on what is going on in the West, they are coming back to Africa to rely on our raw materials, to rely on better business trade agreements in terms of making African leaders think that they are coming to the table with clean hands. I think what you said is very important. It is important for us to understand that at this moment in time, Africa really needs to build stronger institutions. And these institutions doesn't only end at the level of the regional blocs that will create across Africa, which could be a united Africa front, but the leaders of Africa need to build institutions that are within their states. What am I saying here? The political institution, the political environment has to be conducive. The legal environment has to be conducive. The military and the military environment, like the law enforcement environment, has to be stable. And of course, the economic aspect, which is our raw materials, must be reinstated to a point where all the raw materials that are gotten from Africa or that are produced in Africa are used to reinvest it into our African economy. If we don't do that, we are verging towards a very serious catastrophe that is coming. And America saying that America first is not only saying America first, it's also looking at the point where America wants to not only believe in themselves first, but to believe that even if they have a business dealing with you, their interests must be put first. Or must be put in front. So that is not just about American people, it's about the American economy, it's about the American defense, it's about the American institutions, it's about the American dream. So when we shouldn't forget that when we say American first, it means it shouldn't just mean that they are saying that they just want to be for the interest of their people. Whatever building, whatever deal, if you look at what was going on with Zelensky in the Oval Office and an open press interview, is because America has been put first. They want to talk about themselves. They want to hear you say thank you. They want to hear you say sorry. They want to hear you sing America. That's why they are going out more on the media this time around to propagate the American dream. And if African institutions and African government, if African leaders must also stick to the dream of Africa first, they must start from their economic empowerment. They must start from their political institutions, and they must have to look at their raw materials and see how they want to do business with anyone who comes to do business with these African countries. And once you come to do business with them, the deal, the modus operandi, it has to be very clean on the table, so that these investments these profits are reinvested into Africa, so that Africa can be able to suck the juice that comes out of the fruit, than rather using the juice that is sent, that comes out of the fruit from a Western world.
Indeed, and I'll be coming back to you, Chief MUSI. Back to you, Dr. FONGOD, just to, complement what your co-panelists stated. Now let's look at Ukraine as a nation. What happens if the international community, or better still, those European unions that are supporting Ukraine, what if international support declines? Do you believe that this is going to lead to some sort of an end to the war? Let's say a negotiation with Russia.
Well, I think for today I'm going to basically, run away from my brother for a minute. I'll run away from the chief for a minute. And the reason is because the reality is that the only reason why Ukraine is even still in this fight is the $175 billion US dollars, money that has gone into Ukraine, much of which it is, I know for a fact, that has really not even ended up in Ukraine. Only God knows this is the largest, money laundering scheme in U.S. history. So that being said, I think that if you look at what happened at the White House, this really, they had an agreement. Trump, Zelensky had an agreement. The agreement was etched in stone. They did the photo op. It was a photo op, and the whole entire photo op was just to basically talk to reporters on how great a deal it was. Then a Polish reporter working for Polski radio asked a question to Trump and said Poland or Polish people are quite concerned about the fact that Trump seems to be aligning himself with Putin. And Trump said, this is not about Putin or him or aligning himself with Putin. This has everything to do with him aligning and becoming friends with friends with the rest of the world. It has nothing to do with Putin, so that they can be able to promote peace. And he said he was not aligning himself with anybody. He was aligning himself with the United States of America for the good of the world, for the greater good of the world. Then the Vice President, J.D. Vance, Vice President J.D. Vance, stepped in and said that there's this whole entire idea, that is being pushed left and right, and which basically states that you cannot talk to Russia or you cannot talk to Putin. But how can you be trying to bring about any kind of a peace negotiation if the two parties are not involved? And that is when Zelensky, looked at President Zelensky, looked at Vice President J.D. Vance, without even appreciating or calling his name, basically saying Vice President, just like J.D., okay, without even mentioning his name, all right? J.D., what do you mean by, the rule of, or something about democracy or something? And that's where the whole entire meeting fell apart. The reality is this: well, if you show up at the White House of the United States of America, I speak as a Pan-African for sure, but if you show up at the White House of the United States of America after you have collected $175 billion US dollars for a war that was neither started, for a war that had nothing to do with the United States of America, I think you should be a little bit more humble. Right? You should be a little bit more humble in your outlook. The boys in Europe, and so this brings me to the point I wanted to make, is that the Western Bloc is now divided into two. There is the United States of America with the posture of Donald Trump, and there is the EU or the Euro, or Europe for that matter, that is looking towards pushing and advancing this war towards Russia, while America and Donald Trump for that matter, wants peace. And I think that we should be able to celebrate anybody who wants peace any day, over anyone who is pushing for war. And I agree with Chief on this basis that whatever happens in Europe will not end up in Europe. Whatever happens between Russia and Ukraine will not end up there. Whatever happens with the Third World War, where bombs begin to drop in every major city around the world, especially in Europe and in America, it will not end there. We are talking about some serious issues, happening on the continent of Africa as a result of that madness. We are seeing it already. Remember the fighting the killings that took place in the Sahel is already happening on African soil. So we have to be able to do better, and I think that on that basis, I aligned myself with my brother again, that we have to do better in making sure that we solve the issues that pertain to the continent, and basically look within and try as much as we can to find ways in which we should be able to build our own force on the continent of Africa to protect us. Every single day we are relying on some foreign force coming in from the UN. It's as if we said the United Nations was created primarily to take care of whatever garbage is taking place on the continent of Africa. But we have to be able to do better. And again, please, break down the EU, destroy that piece of trash, and build something else in its place.
Of course, Dr. FONGOD, you said a lot in your response. Now back to you, Chief MUSI. You listened to the point of Dr. FONGOD. Now, when you look at blocks, like he was stating, the African Union, at the global level, when you look at institutions like the United Nations, like the European Union, and other neutral parties, do you believe that they have a greater role to play? And what role is that when it comes to preventing greater conflicts like what we're seeing between what we're seeing in Ukraine at this point, that is leading to other blocs like the EU and to some extension the United States?
Well, I think there is something I've deduced from what my co-panelist, Dr. FONGOD, said. If you are creating whatever institutions, if you are creating the United Nations, the European Union, and all these great institutions, they have their operational plan. They have a way that they actually operate. The role of these institutions, call it the United Nations, call it the European Union, and all these institutions, their reason for operating is to promote peace. Their main goal is to promote peace, is to boost the economy, is to support each other in times of need. But when you see war powers like the United States start backing out of some of these institutions, when you hear war powers start blocking aid that was meant to propagate the ideologies of structures like the United Nations, propagating collateral agreements with the European Union and stopping the US aid, pulling out of the World Health Organization and all of this, it means things are falling apart. It means things are falling apart. And if things are falling apart, we need to start looking at where things went wrong. And where things went wrong is at the level of leadership. Donald Trump came into office, his goal is America first. And stopping all of these, giving taxes, exempting people from taxes, lavishing taxes on other countries and nations, it means that his coming into power had his own main objective, which does not align with the international objectives or international laws that were set forth by these institutions like the UN and the European Union. And I already foresee a situation where these institutions are loggerheads. They are loggerheads because if you follow the conversation between Donald Trump and Zelensky, Donald Trump and Putin, who are the main protagonists of the war, you would understand that his middle role is at the level of win-win. Win-win in the sense that he wants to be assured that whatever funds that they put into Ukraine could be gotten back. And if it has to be gotten back, Ukraine has to secure an environment for them to be able to drill these minerals, get whatever thing they get, and then get back their money. And this cannot happen with bombs flying all over our heads. And at the same time, they're negotiating with Russia to do business with Russia and buys from Russia. So there is this thing, I think, which I still emphasize. Most of these institutions, like the UN and European Union, they have their goals. They have benefits, and they have what they propagate. And at this moment in time, with this current crisis that's going on in Ukraine, this war in Ukraine, I can assure you that the world is drilling towards something else, in the sense that they have started making us understand that this war in Ukraine can escalate because there are lots of treaties that have been signed between the European Union, the United Nations, America, Russia, you know, tax exemptions, Ukraine, all these things. They are sure that these treaties that they have signed, if this war prolongs, is going to break most of those things. It's going to stop the ideologies of Donald Trump in making America great again. And also, it's going to kill more people, which is not what we are advocating for. That's not what we are waiting for in this life, that more people should be dying. I buy Donald Trump's point 100% that there should be peace. People should stop dying, because there is no fun in having people dying. Just listen to the hundreds of thousands of people that have died in the Ukraine-Russia war. Imagine the amount of money, we're talking about 178 billion that has been invested into this war. And this money was given to Ukraine to use to kill people. Because the war is about killing humans, destroying natural resources. And if you are destroying the natural resources of a people, you're actually killing the economy. And by killing the economy, you are killing the citizens. So this war, it's a nonsense war, and it has to stop. But if this war has to stop, it is important to understand. I really, really, really understand Zelensky's standpoint in such a meeting at the Oval Office. But I also see with him when he gets to be a little bit hard. I think Dr. FONGOD said, you don't come into someone's office, in the Oval Office, in the White House, and want to say things that you don't want to propagate or support the White House. But why do you want to bring me into the White House when you know I have no voice, when you know I'm coming into the White House to thank you? So, are we saying the Ukrainian government should be licking the American ass? Because honestly, the point here is this. If the Ukrainian government has to get into some agreement and Russia is not on the ground, the Ukrainian government has a right to understand exactly their position in the negotiation process. And they cannot come into the Oval Office and you put them on camera and ask them to say thank you, or you ask them to say we agree on whatever deal you agree, or to tell them that they have no cards. Let's give respect to people. I cannot sit in the house with my wife, and because my wife is the one who carries the pregnancy, she's the one who bears the children, I will now abuse her because of the fact that she has to carry the pregnancy for 9 months. And I only have the right to just impregnate her. I have the right to just take care of her to make sure that she delivers. But I have to feel the pain of the pregnancy. So Ukraine is actually at the verge of losing their citizens. They have the highest number of lost. This money can be refunded to America, but the lives that have been lost in Ukraine can never be retained. So let's understand this young man. Let's understand Zelensky. And let's also understand why he is putting on the jacket he's putting on, the dressing he's dressing. He's at war. So there are certain things that someone at war will not understand. Even if he has to say thank you, he will not understand. So I am saying that let's, as much as we are trying to build these blocks are helping us, the European Union, the United Nations, World Health Organization, all these institutions, they are helping us. But let's not forget that everyone has a say in the national cake. If you count 1 to 10 and one person is not present, 9 is not 10. So let's give right to other countries. Let's give right to people who are involved in a process, to be able to hear them, to be able to feel the pain they have, and to be able to give them assertion or certainty that even if they are losing, they still have a place as a nation. That's my plea. And I think these institutions need to look at it seriously. But I fear America is backing out of most of these institutions because they feel they are more about them first, not the world again, as it was before.
Thank you so much, Chief MUSI. Now, to culminate to this conversation, given we're running out of time, Dr. FONGOD, I remember your co-panelist stated in one of his responses that as opposed to the First and the Second World War, Africa fought the war, and of course, Africa was the one who gave the victory to the West. But then, let's look at it from a different perspective. It's true that if this war escalates, which is not the wish, what would a global conflict, in the modern era actually look like? And we're backing up from that, given we're concluding today's edition. What should be the way forward, away from all these tensions? And how can the African continent continue to champion its own vision of Africa first?
Well, let me do this as fast as I can. I think that the reason why Donald Trump left the World Health Organization primarily was based on the fact that the World Health Organization was pushing this agenda to vaccinate the whole entire world, refusing people to take medicines like ivermectin, medicines like hydroxychloroquine, and they had all kinds of issues with hydroxychloroquine. But we on the African continent had 50-year history of using hydroxychloroquine to treat malaria, and it turned out that hydroxychloroquine was very good in treating COVID-19. At least in helping people who had issues with COVID-19. And so the World Health Organization had its own agenda that was in antithesis with the rule of law and freedom and liberty. And so when you begin to push people to get into things that they don't want to get into, that in itself is not good. So Trump left the World Health Organization. I think it was a good thing. I think a lot of people should leave the World Health Organization, to say the least. There are other ways, other means that we can be able to ensure that people get the medication they need, especially in third world countries or in developing nations. That being said, I think that Africa needs to be able to do better. We need to be able to rise above the ashes of slavery, colonialism, and the pre-colonial era. Everybody was enslaved at some point in time. Everybody, every culture, every civilization has gone through intense pain. We have gone through real issues. But the problem I have with Africans is that we somehow seems to keep rehearsing these issues of the past, and without some concrete stuff that we can basically do on the continent that is measurable. I want to align with my brother to basically state that we need to look within, and I think that we have to look within the continent and find ways in which we can be able to help us. The notion that the West is coming, the notion that the East is coming is all a fallacy. The only person I see coming is another black man. The only Messiah the African needs is not a Caucasian Messiah. The Messiah that the African needs will be an Afrocentric Messiah, a black man like myself. That is the Messiah we need. So when I see my brother, I see a Messiah. When he sees me, he sees another Messiah. We are Messiahs for the continent of Africa, and if that was not going to be the case, I guarantee you that the white Caucasians and white corporations will continue to loot the continent like they are doing currently in the DRC. Goma is burning, and nobody is saying anything. Here we are talking about Ukraine because obviously that's a bigger war, because that's the war that can end all wars. That is the war that can bring an end to the entire planet. I get it. But let's not forget that Goma is burning. The Sahel is still looking for peace. All right. There are sporadic killings taking place in the Cameroons. We need to go to make sure that, we look within the continent of Africa and not look without. If that was going to be the case, I'm hopeful. And always, I think the future looks bright.
Exactly. Africa kept looking within and not without. Thank you, Manslia, Dr. FONGOD. And thank you, Chief MUSI, for your participation in today's edition of Talking Point.
Thank you very much.
And thank my brother as well, Chief.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure to have you both share your insight as far as this conversation is concerned. Meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, it's on that note that we shall be drawing down the curtains of today's edition of Talking Point of our Pan-African channel for you, Media Africa. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and stay in company of our numerous programs.